The wind that swept across the Rawlins rail platform wasn't howling, it was thinking. Slow, hollow, and cold like it had questions of its own. Isabel Hart. 8 years old and no stranger to being left behind, stepped down from the last car of the morning train with one hand clutching a trunk and the other buried deep in her coat. Inside that coat pocket was a letter. Folded, refolded, and smoothed again so many times the ink had started to blur at the corners. It was a plain letter. No poetry, no false charm, just honest words written by a man named Marshall Kincaid, a 59-year-old widower who claimed to be seeking a steady woman with a good mind and a stronger heart. Isabel had believed him, or at least she'd believed in the chance of something real. After a lifetime of near-enoughs and not-quites, a letter like that sounded like a doorway, even if it only opened to a small, quiet life. The platform wasn't busy. Just two young boys throwing stones at a rusted rail switch and a clerk smoking a stubby cigar, half watching the snow gather on the edge of the platform. Nobody looked up when Isabel stepped down. No warm welcome, no offered hand. And maybe that was better. Expectations are just heartbreaks on layaway. Then he appeared. A man in a gray wool coat, trimmed mustache, boots that hadn't seen work in a while. Marshall Kincaid. She recognized him before he recognized her. His photo had been folded into the letter. He emerged from behind a stack of freight crates, walking like someone both hoping and dreading to be seen. "Miss Hart?" he asked, voice slow, like the words didn't want to come out. "Yes," she replied, her tone measured and clear. The kind that didn't ask for approval. His eyes scanned her face, then fell to her hands, then to the scuffed trunk at her feet. Something changed in his posture. I thought you'd be younger," he said at last, wincing like he already knew how wrong it sounded. Isabel let the silence stretch, not to punish, just to make space for the truth. "I'm 58, she said flatly. "Same as in the letter. I came on time like I said I would." He stammered. "I meant no offense, it's just I'd hoped to start a family, children. I should have been clearer." "You were clear enough," she said without flinching. "You just didn't write what you were really thinking. And I didn't come out here to be a cradle for regret." He nodded stiffly, eyes drifting past her like he already wanted to forget her. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "This won't work." Then he turned and walked away. No offer to carry her trunk. No word about the weather or the road into town. Just the crunch of boots fading into the Wyoming morning and the long, unflinching silence that followed. The train hissed behind her and pulled away. Isabel didn't watch it go. Her hands were red with cold, her eyes dry. She wasn't new to disappointment, but this one came with a weight she hadn't packed for. The clerk leaned out the station window and said without looking, "Next, eastbound's Thursday." "You can leave your trunk inside if you want." She didn't answer, just bent down, gripped the handle tight, and hoisted it up with both hands. "I'll carry it," she said. And she did, step by step, across the snow-dusted boards of a town that didn't care who she was or why she'd come. But Isabel Hart wasn't built to beg. She had not come west for rescue. She came for truth, and maybe, if it wasn't too much to ask, a place to plant what was left of her life. And if no one else would make room for her story, then she'd make her own space, even if it meant dragging it behind her 1 mile at a time. The snow had started to fall harder as Isabel Hart made her way down Main Street with her trunk dragging slightly behind. The wooden boards beneath her boots creaked like bones, too tired to hold weight. She passed storefronts shuttered against the cold curtains twitching in windows. But no one stepped out. A boy outside the general store stopped sweeping to watch her go by, but didn't say a word. The town of Larkspur, Wyoming didn't offer comfort or curiosity. It offered distance. She paused by the livery stable, breath hitching in her chest, the weight of the trunk and the moment finally catching up to her. Her gloves, already thin, had gone damp at the fingertips. She didn't cry. She just stood there alone again, wondering what kind of woman kept chasing new beginnings after so many false starts. "You look like that trunk's carrying more than just clothes," a voice called out. She turned to see a man leaning against the wooden post out front. He was tall and weather-bitten, his coat patched at the elbows, hat pulled low over salt and pepper hair. His eyes weren't unkind, just cautious, like someone used to watching wild horses before approaching. "That depends," she said, squinting through the snow. "Are you offering help or judgment?" The man pushed off the post slowly, hands visible, no sudden moves. "Help don't come with strings," he said. "Judgment's for men who got time and no conscience." "I've got neither." She looked at him for a long beat. People could be kind when it was convenient. It was the quiet ones she trusted more, and the ones who didn't try too hard. "Name's Colt Bennett," he added with a tip of his head. "Isabel Hart," she replied, adjusting her grip on the trunk. "I'm not here to cause trouble." Colt gave a small nod. "Didn't figure you were. But you look like someone ought to offer you a place to thaw out before the frost eats through your boots." He gestured behind the stable toward a narrow lane mostly hidden under snow. "Got a wagon out back. Ain't fancy, but it moves. You got a place to go?" "Not anymore," she said flatly. "Well then," he replied, "I reckon that puts us in similar company." The ride was slow and quiet, the wagon creaking under the weight of her trunk and silence. Colt didn't pepper her with questions. He didn't ask why she came west or what she was running from, which told her more about him than any answer might have. The snow gathered on his shoulders, but he didn't shake it off. He just kept driving. The trail led them up a ridge and through a sparse line of pines. Eventually, a small cabin came into view, low-built chimney puffing soft smoke into the gray sky. A dog barked once from somewhere behind it, then fell quiet again. The place didn't look like much, but it looked like someone lived there on purpose. Colt helped her down, then lifted her trunk with one hand, like it weighed half what it did. Inside, the air was thick with pine and the scent of coffee that had been boiled down more than once. He set her trunk near the fireplace and nodded toward the empty chair beside it. "Stove's hot. Chair's yours," he said. "I don't ask questions after dark." That made her pause. "You get many strangers knocking after sundown?" He shrugged. "Nope, but it only takes one to make a habit out of caution." Isabel eased into the chair, her body already beginning to feel again. The fire cracked small and determined. She rubbed her hands together, unbuttoned her coat slowly. Colt didn't hover or offer explanations. He moved to the table, poured 2 tin mugs of coffee, and set one down beside her. "You live alone?" she asked. "Long enough to know it doesn't mean empty," he replied, sliding into the other chair across from her. They sat in that warm hush, each on their own side of the fire. For the first time in days, maybe weeks, Isabel felt like she didn't have to explain who she was or why she had no one. Colt didn't press. He didn't pretend to understand. He just poured the coffee and let her sit. "I had goats once," she offered after a while, mostly to fill the quiet. Colt raised an eyebrow. "Goats mean little things. Ate everything but the Bible and the fence post." He chuckled, a soft, dry sound that surprised even him. "That make you a widow or a shepherd?" "Both," she said, lips quirking slightly. "Buried the man. Let the goats run." They didn't laugh exactly, but something softened between them. The kind of quiet that follows the truth, not the kind that avoids it. Colt stood to stir the fire. She watched his hands, steady, sure, work-worn, but not cruel. The kind of hands that knew how to build and how to bury, and probably had done both. "You planning to stay long?" he asked without turning around. Isabel didn't answer right away. She looked around the cabin, bare walls, handmade shelves, a coat hung with care by the door. "That depends," she said finally. "On what?" She looked into the fire, on whether the silence here is the good kind. Colt sat back down, didn't press it, just nodded once and said, "It can be." The snow had thickened by nightfall, turning the windows of Colt Bennett's cabin into pale blue ghosts. Inside, the fire snapped steady, warm enough to hold back the cold, but not enough to chase it from the edges. Isabel Hart sat in the chair he'd offered her coat, drying by the hearth, her boots resting near the stove, steam rising faintly from their seams. Dinner had been simple stew made from root vegetables and last season's venison. They ate in a silence that wasn't strained. Some silences spoke louder than others, and this one said, "We've both been through enough not to crowd the air with noise." Colt had returned to the table and was relacing an old boot when the knock came. 3 short raps, sharp, clean, not desperate like someone caught in the storm. Just there, like whoever it was had been standing outside long enough to wait for the right moment. Colt didn't stand fast. He didn't need to. His right hand slipped around the butt of the rifle, leaning against the wall, then rested loose at his side. He moved to the door without words. Isabel didn't move either. She pulled the quilt around her tighter, but kept one hand close to the satchel at her feet, the one that had held more than travel linen. She'd packed like someone who knew the West didn't offer protection, only options. When Colt cracked the door, the wind rushed in, biting and bold. Evening set a man on the other side. Mid-30s, maybe. His coat was soaked dark at the shoulders and his hat drooped under melting snow. "Name's Rowan Tate. My horse took a spill 2 miles back on frozen shale. Leg snapped, had to put her down. Been walking since dusk. You got floor space." Colt looked him over without blinking. "You hurt?" "Just cold," Rowan answered. Voice too smooth, too fast. "Tired. I'll sleep near the fire and be gone at first light. You carrying just charm?" Rowan smiled. "And maybe a knife, but only for wolves." Colt didn't return the smile. "Blankets are near the hearth. Keep your hands where we can see them." He opened the door wider and let the man inside. Rowan stepped over the threshold with a familiarity that didn't belong to strangers. His boots squelched with wetness. His eyes swept the cabin quickly, table chairs, Isabel trunk. His gaze lingered on the trunk half a second too long. "Didn't figure you two for a couple," he said, kneeling near the fire. "That's because you assume too much," Isabel said calmly. Colt closed the door and returned to his seat, setting the rifle closer this time. Not pointed, not hidden. Just present. Rowan laid back against the wall with an exaggerated sigh. "Storm like this one y'all saved me tonight. No use worrying about anything else now." "I'm not worried," Colt said evenly. "That makes one of us." Rowan muttered. They didn't say more after that. But the room changed. Isabel watched him from the corner of her eye. The way he breathed too measured. The way he rested too still. His eyes fluttered shut too quickly and his chest rose and fell like someone trying to look unconscious. Later, after half an hour of fire crackle and stew steam, Isabel leaned close to Colt and said softly, "He's not asleep." "I know," Colt replied. "You seen this before?" Colt looked at the flame. "My brother brought home a man once. Said he owed him his life from back east. Man smiled too fast, said too little. Turns out he meant to rob us blind and leave us cold." "I woke first." Isabel nodded once. No further questions. She didn't need the rest of the story to understand the shape of it. She knew the way betrayal tasted in a room. She could smell it now beneath Rowan's soggy boots and polished grin. They didn't rouse him. They didn't warn him. They just waited. The kind of waiting that keeps your boots on while you sleep. The kind where your hand stays close to what protects you. The fire burned low and the wind scratched the roof. Somewhere outside, a tree groaned under its own weight. Isabel didn't sleep much. She kept her eyes on the man by the fire, watching for the twitch, the shift, the flicker of something wrong. But Rowan never moved. His breath stayed steady, too perfect. By morning, a pale light bled through the window and the cabin air felt tight. Colt stirred the coals with the same quiet as before, but this time the rifle was already in arm's reach. Rowan opened his eyes all at once, like a man who hadn't really been resting. "Hell of a fire," he said with a grin. "You folks know how to keep a guest alive." No one answered. "You always offer shelter to strangers?" he asked. "Only when the storm's meaner than the man," Colt replied. Rowan looked to Isabel again, slower this time. "Not many women like you this far out." She didn't blink. "Good. Then you won't have anyone to compare me to when I throw you out." Rowan laughed, then moved. He lunged for the rifle, fast low. Colt blocked him with his shoulder, sent him into the wall. Rowan came up with a knife steel flashing in the morning light, but Isabel was already on her feet. The revolver in her hand glinted, as cold as the frost outside. "Drop it," she said, calm as rain. Rowan paused. "You're bluffing. Try me." He looked from her to Colt, who hadn't said a word. "You're crazy." "No," Colt said. "We just don't like thieves. You put me outside, I'll freeze." Rowan growled. "Then move fast," Colt replied. Rowan hesitated, then let the knife fall. The sound echoed more than it should have. He opened the door, stormed into the cold, and slammed it like a child. Inside, the silence returned. Isabel lowered the gun. Colt poured coffee. "Done that?" before he asked. She set the revolver on the mantel, enough to know when not to wait for someone else. He nodded once, and the fire kept burning steady, loyal, like nothing had ever stirred the stillness. The morning light filtering through the cabin windows was silver and quiet, like the land itself was holding its breath. Isabel Hart hadn't slept much, not because she feared what might happen, but because she had seen too much to assume safety just because the fire was warm. She sat near the hearth, cup in hand, revolver tucked just inside her worn satchel, eyes on the man stretched out near the embers. Rowan Tate hadn't moved all night. No shifting, no sighing, just too still, the kind of stillness that made your skin itch, not from fear but from recognition. Colt Bennett was near the stove, his back to the wall, watching through the curtainless window, as if the snow might say something. He didn't speak much in the mornings. That suited Isabel fine. She hadn't come west looking for a talker. Rowan sat up suddenly, all ease and grin. "Hope I didn't snore," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. "Dreamed I was back in a saloon in Elko. Never trust a game of cards when the dealer don't blink." Neither of them responded. Isabel's fingers wrapped a little tighter around her mug. Colt just reached behind him, the motion smooth, subtle, resting his hand near the rifle, leaning against the wall. Rowan stood stretching like a cat, scanning the room again. "Y'all got a nice setup here. Cozy, honest." His eyes landed on Isabel's trunk again. "Bet there's a story in that old thing." Isabel didn't flinch. "Plenty. None of them yours to borrow." He smiled wider, like that was a game he intended to play anyway. "You folks planning to stay here long term? Seems like the kind of place that gets lonely when the snow closes in." "We get by," Colt said, still not facing him. "Guess folks like you know how to survive," Rowan muttered, stepping closer to the door, too close to the rifle. "Still, sometimes it's better to have backup, just in case." Before either of them could move, Rowan lunged. His hand shot toward the rifle with speed that didn't match his previous laziness. But Colt was quicker. He turned on instinct, throwing his weight into Rowan's shoulder and sending him crashing into the wall with a thud that rattled the window glass. Rowan stumbled, then came up with a knife, a long, narrow blade drawn from the inside of his coat. His face wasn't charming anymore. It was lean and sharp and full of calculation. Colt moved to block again, but the moment shifted. Isabel was already on her feet. The revolver appeared in her hand, like it had always belonged there. "Drop it," she said, not loud, not shaking, just certain. Rowan froze mid-step, blade still held firm, chest heaving. "You're bluffing," he spat, eyes flicking between the two of them. "Try me," she answered. He stared at her, this woman with gray at her temples and fire in her eyes, and something in him twitched. Doubt, or maybe memory. Either way, it was enough. "I've seen mean," she said. "I've seen hungry and desperate. You're just small." Colt hadn't moved. He didn't need to. The room had already decided who was in charge. Rowan took a single step back, then two. The blade still in his hand, but lower now. His breath fogged in the cold air coming from the cracked door. "You're both out of your minds," he muttered. "You throw me out there, I'll freeze." Isabel didn't blink. "You should have thought about that before you tried to take what wasn't yours. You don't even know me, and you never bothered to ask who I am," she said. Rowan looked at Colt, still silent, still steady, then back to Isabel. "I'll come back," he threatened, "when you're not watching." That's when Colt finally spoke. "Then make sure your aim's better than your timing," he said, "because next time I won't be this polite." Rowan hesitated, then threw the knife to the floor. It clattered against the plank wood like punctuation. He pulled open the door and stepped out into the storm, slamming it behind him with a finality that didn't carry weight. Inside, the quiet returned. Isabel stood still for a moment, breath even. Then she set the revolver back in the satchel and folded it shut. Colt let out a low exhale and walked over to stir the fire. "That yours?" he asked, nodding toward the pistol. "Since Missouri," she said. "Never had a man teach me how to use it, just learned when it counted." Colt gave a small nod. "You've done that before enough to know when not to wait for someone else." They didn't talk about it again. There was no need. The room didn't demand retelling, only presence, and they both remained present. That said more than any war story. Colt added another log to the fire. The flames flared orange and gold across the floorboards. The room felt warmer somehow, not just from heat, but from survival, from the knowing that they had made it through something together. "I've got coffee," he offered, lifting the kettle. "Only if you have enough for two," she said, returning to her chair. They sat across from each other again, as they had the night before, only now something had shifted. Not drastically, not with ceremony, but like a fence post that finally settled deeper into the earth after a storm. Later, Colt picked up the knife Rowan had dropped and studied the weight of it. "You ever think about going back east?" he asked absently. Isabel looked at the fire. "Back to what?" "The people who left me or the ones who forgot I existed?" Colt grunted softly. "Fair enough." The day passed slow after that. The cabin breathed with them. No explanations, no performances, just coffee. Wood smoke and two people who no longer had to pretend they didn't know what it meant to be alone and to choose not to be. Outside, the wind carried Rowan Tate into the next valley. Inside, Isabel's heart didn't flinch when it howled. Because some storms pass, some come back. But either way, she would be ready. The morning after, Rowan Tate vanished into the wind. The world outside the cabin was soft and silver. The storm had passed, but it had left its signature behind, snow packed tight against the porch steps, tree limbs bowed heavy, and a kind of hush that felt earned. Inside, the fire burned low but stubborn, and a new rhythm had taken hold. Not fast, not loud. Just two people who had faced something together and survived it without fanfare or thanks. Isabel's heart moved through the cabin with quiet purpose. She folded the quilt over the rocker, swept the scattered wood chips Colt tracked in from the porch, and ladled out the last of the venison stew for breakfast. Colt didn't say much, he never did in the mornings, but something about the way he poured her coffee first now said more than small talk ever could. Later, while she was rinsing the stew pot at the pump out back, she noticed it just inside the doorway. A second chair had been pulled a little closer to the fire. Not asked for, not announced, just there. And her trunk, which had sat pressed tight against the wall since the day she arrived, had been nudged a few inches back. Made room. She stood there a moment, letting the water run over her fingers until it numbed them. Not from cold, from understanding. When she stepped back inside, she didn't speak of it. She just sat in the chair like it had always belonged to her. The rest of the day was slow work, stringing wire along the southern fence line, replacing a crooked post that had leaned since last fall. Colt worked with steady hands, never rushing. Isabel matched his pace, not because she was trying to impress him, but because working in silence with someone who didn't expect her to be soot or small felt like a kind of peace she hadn't known before. "That post is off," she said, eyeing his hammer work. "So's the ground," he replied without looking up. "You fix one, the other leans harder." He glanced at her, just a flicker under the brim of his hat. Still worth setting right. They didn't say much after that, didn't have to. That night when she came in from wiping snow off her sleeves and boots, she found a new dishcloth folded beside the basin. A small gesture, but one with care. And when she hung her coat, Colt was already pouring a second cup of coffee without asking. "You always this quiet?" she asked, taking her seat. "I talk when I've got something worth saying." She nodded, sipping. "Makes sense. Too many men think their breath's more important than their ears." He smirked, eyes on the fire. "You always this honest, I don't carry lies well. They sit wrong in my bones." They sat like that for a long time, 2 cups half full, the air between them neither heavy nor empty. Eventually, Colt set his mug down and leaned back in his chair. "There's a dance in town next Saturday," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You dance not well," he admitted. "But I figure it's not about the steps. It's about who you're willing to stand beside while folks stare." She studied him. The quiet lines in his face, the hands that never reached too fast, the way he made space without asking if she wanted it. "You inviting me to be stared at?" she asked. "I'm inviting you to stand next to me while they wonder why I'm smiling more than usual." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no either, and that was enough. Come Saturday evening, the sky over Larkspur cleared just enough for stars to peek through. The snow had frozen into a hard crust that crunched beneath wagon wheels. Colt's team moved steady down the main road, and Isabel sat beside him. Gloves' neat hair pinned back with a small lavender comb she'd tucked away in the bottom of her trunk years ago. Her dress wasn't fancy, but it was clean and pressed, the kind of blue that looked good in firelight. Colt wore a coat borrowed from his brother's days in town, too formal for him, but he wore it anyway. When they stepped into the town hall, lamplight poured over them in soft amber and the fiddle music didn't stop. But the room changed. Heads turned. Words paused on lips. Some remembered the woman who had arrived alone in the snow. Some had heard whispers about what happened that night in the cabin. But Isabel didn't look for their approval. She walked in on her own, back straight steps sure. Colt didn't take her arm like a prize. He walked beside her like an equal. They danced slow, imperfect, but their movements matched. No one cut in. A few stared. One woman near the punch table leaned toward another and muttered, "She's too old for all that." Isabel heard it. Didn't flinch. "Good," she whispered to Colt. "Means I'm dancing for me, not them." He smiled, the rare, quiet kind that made the room feel smaller. "You always were," he said. When the song ended, no one clapped, but no one interrupted either, because sometimes belonging doesn't need permission. It just needs presence. That night, back at the cabin, Colt lit the lantern while Isabel hung up her coat. The fire was already going, 2 chairs side by side. He handed her a cup of coffee. Too late for caffeine. She shook her head. Not if it's from the right company. They sat close, not touching, not speaking, but something settled between them like a house finally remembering it had walls and someone to lean on. Outside, the snow pressed against the windows again. Inside, Isabel Hart no longer felt like a visitor. She just felt home. It happened 3 weeks after the dance. The days had grown longer, but the snow still clung to the hills like it was reluctant to loosen its hold. The town of Larkspur was slow to thaw, not just from winter, but from its own patterns of silence and suspicion. Yet on one particular morning, the chapel on the edge of town filled with the scent of wood smoke and pressed wool, and people gathered in a way that wasn't loud or festive, but present. And that made all the difference. Isabel Hart stood at the back of the chapel alone, not because she didn't have anyone to give her away, but because she had never needed that. Her dress was dark green, the color of pine needles after a storm, simple but freshly stitched. Her boots were polished, not new. Her hair was pulled back and fastened with the same lavender comb she'd worn to the dance. She carried no bouquet, just her breath steady and her eyes clear. At the front stood Colt Bennett, shoulders squared beneath a clean shirt and a coat that didn't quite fit, borrowed from a friend who hadn't expected to see it worn at a wedding again. He looked uncomfortable in the collar, but not uncertain in the least. His hands were clasped in front of him. His boots planted firm. He didn't fidget. That was how folks knew it was real. No music played, no petals scattered, but the small room, just 6 pews and a cracked window that looked out toward the fence line, felt full, not of ceremony, but of something quieter respect. A blacksmith's wife, who once bought eggs from Isabel, sat in the second pew. A teenage girl from the mercantile watched with her chin propped on her hands. A retired ranch foreman who had worked the same ridgeline as Colt stood by the door. These weren't society guests, they were witnesses. When Isabel reached the front, she didn't take Colt's arm out of obligation. She took it because they had already walked together through silence, storm, and scur. This was just another step. The preacher, old as fence posts and nearly as straight, opened a worn Bible but barely looked down. "Do you, Colt Bennett, take Isabel Hart to stand beside you through whatever weather God allows?" Colt's voice was even. "I already have." "And do you, Isabel?" She raised her hand gently. "I reckon he took me in before either of us knew what that meant." There was a murmur, not laughter, not surprise, but warmth. The preacher nodded. "Then by truth and time you are husband and wife." They kissed soft and certain. Not the start of something wild, but the confirmation of something long held and hard earned. When they turned to face the room, no one clapped. Instead, one older man near the window tipped his hat. A woman wiped her eyes quietly. The chapel bell rang once clear into the cold air. Not for tradition, but because someone pulled the rope who wanted to. That afternoon, they rode back to the cabin together in the same wagon they'd used since the first time Colt had offered her a ride with no strings. Their fingers didn't need to be laced for the closeness to be known. At home, the fire was already burning. 2 mugs sat on the table, her trunk still by the wall, though now with a folded quilt resting on top, the one they'd begun stitching together on slow evenings. Colt stoked the fire. Isabel poured the coffee. "You never asked what I came west hoping to find," she said, turning toward him. He looked up. "Didn't have to." She set the cup down. You never asked if I was planning to stay. Colt reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to meet it. You already did, he said. Outside, the land remained rough, wild, and slow to change. But inside that cabin, something had shifted. A new season had taken root, not in the weather, but in the choice to belong to one another without needing to be saved. And that, more than love letters or wedding bells, was the miracle they had earned. Not every journey west begins with hope. Some begin with disappointment, silence, or the quiet weight of being overlooked too many times. Isabel Hart didn't come seeking rescue, she came seeking truth. What she found was not what she expected, a man who didn't speak much, didn't promise much, but stayed. That was enough. In a world that often measures worth by youth, beauty, or usefulness, this story reminds us that belonging is not something we wait to be handed, it's something we build one choice at a time. Isabel didn't need validation from the man who rejected her, nor from the town that whispered behind curtains. She needed space and someone willing to make it. Colt didn't offer romance in the way stories often write it. He offered respect without question, presence without condition, and loyalty without performance. Sometimes love isn't a spark. It's a steady flame someone keeps lit while the snow stacks high outside. Together they didn't rewrite who they were, they acknowledged it and chose each other anyway. This isn't a fairy tale, it's something better, a reminder that no matter your age, your past, or how many times you've been passed over, you're still worth choosing. Not someday, not eventually, now. And when the world is too cold to welcome you, choose to build your own fire. Someone just might pull up a chair beside it and stay. If this story stirred something in you, that quiet ache for healing hope, and the kind of love that shows up and stays, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more heartfelt Western tales. At Frontier Reverie, we bring you stories where grit meets grace and the forgotten find their place. Share this with someone who believes it's never too late to be seen and chosen.